Hi there, boys and girls. Mr. Truan here. So why do we write narratives? When we write a narrative, we tell a story and we try and make sense of events that have happened or that are happening. It can be informative, so it tells us about things and tells us about what's happening, but it's meant to be entertaining. There's different forms of narratives. We call them genres. And some of those, examples of some of those are myths, legends, fairy tales, what we call fables or parables, like in the Bible, parables, science fiction, adventure, historical, romance, mystery, horror, funny or humorous stories, and fantasy. So how do we structure a narrative? We have 4 main sections. All narratives start with what we call the orientation, and the orientation sets the scene. Our orientation tells us about our main characters, it introduces them, it gives the setting where the story is taking place, and tells us a bit about what's coming up ahead. After the orientation, we usually lead into what's called a complication. Now, a complication is a problem. Sometimes we call it the problem. The complication comes up as something that our main character is usually dealing with or has to deal with, and that leads us down the path of the rest of our story. So once that problem has come up, we work towards what's called a resolution. And so there's a series of events will take place after that. A series of events to sort out the problem, to fix the problem, and that leads us to the finishing point of the story. Now, the last part you see here is called a coda. Not all stories have a coda, but a coda sometimes is present in a story, and that tells us what our main character has learnt along the way. But again, a lot of stories don't have them, and when we write them, they won't necessarily have to have them. Here's an example of a narrative, and I just thought we'd look at it piece by piece. So it's called Through the Magic Garden, and here's our orientation. That's where we're going to see a lot of the who, what, when, and where. So who are our main characters? Where's the story set? A beautiful tree stood on its own, with frosty tulips dancing around the bottom of it. In the shade of the tree, a bench with an old look to it stood proudly. On it sat Emily, main character. She was excited as she pulled back her long golden hair. She gazed at her mysterious book and whispered quietly, "I wish that I was like Alice in Wonderland, where everything is mysterious. Around here, everything's the same." So we get to learn a bit about Emily, where she's from, what she looks like, and maybe a bit of it leading us up to a bit of a problem here. It shows us straight away that she's a little bit bored. We move on to our complication, our problem. Suddenly, the book began to shake. Emily was so scared she jumped out of her seat. "What's happening to my book?" she wondered. Slowly, she walked towards it and opened it up. The pictures looked real, so she jumped right in and landed on her hands and knees. When she looked up, she saw a long curved blue path which led into a deep dark forest. Emily realised that her wish had come true. Okay, so it's not really presenting as a problem, but really it is. She's stuck now inside a book, and that's going to lead us to the problem, the real major problem of how does she get out of it. Okay, sequence of events. Okay, now we saw that and we called that the resolution. The sequence of events leads to the resolution. So if we jump back a page here, you'll see it's not listed, but it really kind of, these are all kind of interlinked. Let's jump back again. She began to walk along the narrow path. The trees were peculiar, that means strange. They seemed to be looking at her. Their bark was shaped like a pair of eyes. The eyes of the tree followed her until she left the forest. At the edge of the forest, she caught her breath and was amazed to see a beautiful and unique bird. A new paragraph. A long-legged flamingo hopped around Emily and said, "Come with me." She was shocked. A bird that can talk? She thought. The brightly coloured bird led her into a brilliant castle. "Wow," she exclaimed. "Come inside," said the bird. Inside the castle was a magnificent hall. To the side of the hall was a door. Emily slowly opened it. "Search for your book," instructed the flamingo. So now we should be coming to, with our resolution, the problem being solved when everything works out for better or worse. Emily searched for over an hour until she found her treasured book. Quickly, she turned the pages of Alice in Wonderland and jumped right back in. She landed flat on the ground of her garden. "I'm glad that's over," Emily said.